Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Inky Thoughts podcast. Today is an episode we're looking forward to quite a great deal for two main reasons. One, we're dealing with a personal bugbear of mine. And two, I have a person on here that not only has been on the podcast before, but who shares this bugbear with me. Today, we're going to be talking, big reveal, you could say, about tattoo addiction. And I have got quite the guest to talk to me about it and welcoming him back to the podcast, the ink shrink himself, Matt Davis, who has one side of this argument, which is from the psychiatric spectrum, and I will be fielding up for the social scientific, sociological field of the spectrum. And to be honest, I will reveal immediately, none of us are going to be on the side of people that think this is real. We won't be completely dismissing, of course, that this is also something you have your own perceptions on as a person, but we will be a bit more critical of it. So if you're not up for that, or being a bit more introspectively critical, if you feel you're tattoo addicted, this might not be your episode. But I highly suggest listening in, because it will be very nerdy today. But Matt, do you want to remind people why you might be very good to talk about on this?
Sure. So I am a psychiatrist by training, so meaning I did 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, and then a residency in adult psychiatry. So I'm a physician and psychiatrist especially, and I've been in the field since 2008. So I have expertise in making psychiatric diagnoses, including, for example, substance use disorders, which used to be called in previous versions of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual substance addictions or dependence. And then I'm also a tattoo enthusiast. I have almost 600 hours in on my bodysuit and have collected pieces from 33 artists at this point. And I'm essentially covered from below my neck. You probably can't tell from looking at me right now, but I am pretty extensively covered.
I mean, it's a little bit of a tease. There's a little bit of a tease with the top button there. There's a bit of the chest piece sticking out. But
Yep.
you won't have to look far online to see Matt's quite extensive body of work. You've been in several publications, actually. You've almost become more well known by now, despite how well educated you are in psychiatry and from Harvard, no less. You've become more well known now for the tattoos than anything else.
I think probably, yeah. And I've been trying to get myself out there on social media, because one of my big aims, as I think we talked about during the first podcast, is uh, making it more acceptable for professionals to have visible tattoos and even extensive tattoos.
Yeah.
And when I started up my social media about a little over a year ago, that's really what I wanted to do, and kind of, not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. So I put myself out there and shown how extensively covered I am.
That's sort of how we connected as well, because I think that was what we actually started talking about before we even recorded the first episode online, because I was trying to do my whole academic thing and I would just move home to Denmark, all that stuff. And I'd started all that stuff. So yeah, I mean, we both have that passion. But speaking of social media, that's actually how this episode idea came about. Because anybody that loves, as me and Matt also do, we're very fond of Inked Mag. Inked is quite a great thing. But they do these discussion posts, and one of them was about the topic today, tattoo addiction. And Matt had the audacity of making a very well-argued post beneath it about how, clinically speaking, you can't define tattoo addiction in that way. Like, you can't at least clinically argue that it has any real substance to it as such.
Exactly. Yeah. And I understand the temptation for why people want to label this type of behavior an addiction. And, to the lay public, as a psychiatrist, one of my great frustrations is that the, there are a number of terms that mean something clinically to us that are used in the lay public a lot that don't have that meaning. So, for example, people will say I'm bipolar or I have panic attacks or whatever, and they may well, but I think those terms get thrown around a lot without really meaning what they mean to us. And it's similar with the idea of addiction too.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But yeah, but it's sort of to give it a yet another example. It's how I think a lot of people today will say, "Oh, I'm depressed today," if they're having a really sad, down day. And even I can be guilty of that sometimes, though I've not been diagnosed with depression. But that's the sort of point Matt's driving at here. That it becomes sort of almost slang the way we use it in a way, and it loses the connection to the actual diagnosis in a way.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's it has implications because a number of implications. Because if you say something is an addiction, first of all, um, there's going to be theoretically treatment associated with that. And so when people, for example, have substance addictions or what we now call substance use disorders, there's a whole host of treatment. There's medication treatment, there's group treatment and 12-step programs, there's individual therapy and so on and so forth. Whereas if you talk about a tattoo addiction or any of these behavioral addictions, quote unquote, there are some maybe limited um, types of treatments, but nothing like I'm thinking, for example, another addiction would be something called like exercise addiction or sex addiction. I mean, there are things like cognitive behavioral therapy, but it's just not quite the same as when you're talking about a substance
Mm.
addiction. But I also think having worked with a number of dozens, hundreds of patients, maybe thousands of patients over the course of my career, who have substance use disorders or addictions, I also think it kind of um, cheapens their experience because these are
Mm.
people who literally have a neurobiological condition, an illness, a disease that they're trying to recover from. And if I say I have a tattoo addiction, it to me it kind of cheapens their lived experience. So I get kind of I don't know defensive about it. I guess it just kind of annoys me.
No, but I fully agreed, or at least quite to quite some extent agree with this because the thing is, if you are, for example, suffering with alcoholism or drug addiction or anything like that, even as a sociologist, some real mental health issues or addictive behavioral patterns with other stuff, it can be really dismissive in a way of how your lived experience is quite critical and important to take serious, that other people claim addiction almost willy-nilly as soon as they sense a lack of self-control in themselves regarding something. Because let's face it, me and Matt are not arguing that we are all just like that we refuse that you can be impulsive with tattoos or go further than you originally planned. Absolutely not refuting that. We're just arguing that it doesn't need to be explained away by suddenly claiming addiction.
Exactly right. I think it as we better understand our brains and how they work, because by the way, we, from a medical standpoint, we pretty well understand how a heart works. We pretty well understand how a liver works. We are not great at understanding how the brain works from a neurological or a psychiatric standpoint. I mean, we have some understanding, but there's a lot more to go. And I think in time, we will better be able to define these behavioral addictions and,
Hmm.
and are they so like just taking a step back, if we're talking about a substance addiction or a substance use disorder, there are changes in people's brains that occur over time, and it has to do with like the reward pathway and what it's called the salience system. So meaning like what the brain winds up prioritizing in terms of like what the brain wants. There's phenomena called wanting and liking and connected to the brain's intrinsic reward system. But with addictions, that all of that neurocircuitry becomes sort of aberrantly wired, and there are defined changes that you can see on brain imaging studies in people with those disorders. We don't really see that with behavioral addictions, quote unquote. I'm going to kind of just always put that in quotes if I find myself using that terminology. Um, but I think in time, maybe we will understand that these behavioral addictions have neurobiological changes associated with them, but we just don't right now. And I don't think we have any data to show that they're consistent at all with what, classic addictions like substance use disorders.
I mean, I agree. I very much agree there as well. Where I think some things may change with time as we learn more, but I would still hold to the point that I don't actually, and this is more from to argue a bit more from my side of the social sciences. I don't think we can talk about tattoo addiction for another reason that most people. This might actually also cut into another bit of this pet peeve of mine. Most people I meet or ever encounter online or otherwise I see around in the online space or in real life that say they have a tattoo addiction are often not that tattooed.
Oh, yeah, that's funny. Yeah.
It's it,
Yeah.
that's just another pet peeve of mine. But before we get into that, because I do want to get into that with Matt as well and his experience with that. The other thing
Mm-hmm.
is just that, as we talked a bit about before the interview, I feel that people sometimes need addiction as a way of protecting themselves. In a way,
Mm-hmm.
they sort of use it as a way to argue both to themselves and other people that, of course, I'm doing this. Of course, I'm going further than I ever planned to do with tattoos. Of course, I'm using more money than people think I should with this. But you have to understand, I'm addicted to it. I can't help this. And I personally think it might be a lingering sort of normative sense of how society is ordered that they haven't divorced themselves from in a way. That
Mm-hmm.
they still have a bit of that way society sort of tries to box us in, still in the back of the head. And then they sort of need something to assist them in in moving away from that, so to speak.
Yeah, well, psychologically, it's a rationalization. That's what we
Yeah.
would call it. It's a way of, it's a defense mechanism. And it's a way of sort of saying, like exactly what your point was that, you know, I, it's like a built-in justification or an excuse. And I understand the temptation to have that thought process because still, as you and I have talked about extensively in podcasts and offline, I mean, there is definitely still judgment that goes along with people who are tattooed and people who have visible tattoos or people who are extensively tattooed. And so, any of us that have, like you and I, that have a fair amount of tattoo work, I mean, we've been there. I mean, by and large nowadays, it's really almost all positive feedback I get. But every once in a while, I'll get that cockeyed look or rarely, an unpleasant comment or whatever. So I think that there's almost this natural built-in like defense of like I need to justify this,
Yeah.
and there's like some insecurity there, like you're already thought of as being weird or different for being tattooed, and now if you have a number of tattoos, that's even weirder and more socially deviant or something.
That sort of fits into another thing I noticed because we've been talking about doing this episode for a while, and I attended a couple of conventions in between last time me and Matt spoke over video at least. And I sort of thought about it while at them as well, that you never really hear anybody, even when you walk around and you notice what people are talking about and that, you rarely ever hear people in the convention space talk about tattoo addiction. And that sort of fits with this idea that because there's no need to justify at a tattoo convention to other people who are either as tattooed as you or even more tattooed than you, but at least share the same passion for tattoos, even, no matter how much either of you have. Why you have them? Like there's no need to justify it in the same way. It's often in other spaces where people do it.
Excellent point. And I think the tattoo community, whether it's at a convention or elsewhere, I think one of the things that has drawn me to tattooing is there is this connection that a lot of us have. There's this idea in some ways still that tattoo people are at the fringe of society, it's not mainstream, although it's becoming much more so. But I think that a lot of us can kind of relate and
Mm.
having felt judged or whatever at various points in our lives. I've talked about, tattoos for me have been a way of kind of reclaiming my body and my sense of self, having dealt with, body image issues from a very young age. but I think that that brings us all together a lot.
Mm.
So that's why you don't hear that type of terminology, because there isn't that feeling of needing to be defensive. And even things that would be considered deviant or strange or whatever in other realms are not at a tattoo convention. I mean, I got my genitals tattooed at a tattoo convention about a month ago, a really big one actually in Chicago. And there was the
Bit of a
occasional,
brag there, Matt.
oh, maybe,
Oh, you meant the
maybe, but
convention. You
no.
meant the convention. Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. No, no, I'm not talking about my anatomy. I'm talking about the convention. I have no illusions about my anatomy, but what like there's the occasional like gawker or whatever, who would come by the booth and like, oh, like what kind of weird stuff is going on here. But by and large, it was just very supportive. It was more just like,
Yeah.
hey, like what's this process like for you? Like, does it hurt a lot? Like, hey, good,
Mm.
good luck. Like the typical thing that you would
Yeah, yeah,
experience
yeah.
at a convention, like pat on the
Absolutely.
back, like you're getting a cool piece, you're getting it from a great artist. Can't wait to see it be done. Hope you can get through this session. And there's very little like, judgment on the fact that I was getting it was just another place to get tattooed.
Also, the most negative you'll ever hear in that situation at a convention, more often than not, at least in my experience, is, "Oh, I would never get that done." But it's cool you're doing it. Like that's the thing.
So well said. Yeah, exactly. And um, that's why I think I've been drawn into this community.
Yeah.
One of the reasons.
But it speaks to the point as well. But I want to get back to the other point I mentioned, which is because I noticed that because there was one guy especially, and I think both me and Matt sort of clocked him. The first guy that sort of like made a long comment on your comment on the inked post, and I couldn't help because I always check out, okay, what does he look like then? How into
Mm.
it is he? And he barely had two full sleeves to put together. Like, so it's funny that he feels it sort of speaks to the point I made that he's so adamant about wanting to defend tattoo addiction. Yet he's saying it to a man as covered as Matt is. Because so even if we ignore, which I think is very difficult to do with this topic, but let's ignore the Howard education and the years of being a psychiatrist, working with substance abuse and all that stuff. But Matt's covered from the neck down, all over. Like Matt's looking for the tip of his thumbs right now. Somebody to cover that. Like that's at the bottom of his feet. What was it? The heels and the toes. That's about it left now. So
Yeah,
it's funny for somebody less tattooed than Matt to be so adamant about wanting to defend addiction. And it got me thinking. I looked at some profiles. I don't know if you've heard of these people, but there's one. I think is Puerto Rican. It's a journalist and I think music producer called Yalsi.
hmm
He's very, very covered. And then there's the Canadian guy. I can't remember what he calls himself, but Remy is his name. And I followed both of them for a few years. I've never heard and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And please do correct me, anybody that might know better. But I rarely ever hear them talk about them being addicted to tattoos, even though both of them have gone over the same bodysuit multiple times.
Yep. Yeah, I know Yelsey. I don't know the second person you mentioned, and I've not like seen extensive interviews with him, but I have seen him speak, and I have not heard him mention. I mean, one of the critical things of an addiction is a feeling that you cannot stop, that you have lost control
Mm,
over the whatever it is that you're addicted to. And as covered as I am, and as much pain as I've gone through, and as much effort as I've gone through missing work and traveling and healing tattoos and the money that I've spent, I have never at any point felt like I have lost control.
mm,
To me, it is something that I am passionate about. It's a hobby.
mm,
Another thing that I am passionate about that's a big part of my life is running. I'm a distance runner. Basically in half marathon, shape all the time. I have been for the past 15 years, and I devote a lot of my time to, how can I get better as a runner, and what is the latest equipment that I can use? What is the latest best training regimen or diet schedule, or whatever the case may be. But I don't feel about the running that I've lost control. Like I'd be upset if I couldn't run. I'd be sad. I would probably try to find a different outlet because it's good for my physical and mental health. But it's the same with tattoos. Like there was no point where I ever felt like I couldn't stop. And I think a great example of that is like you and I were talking before this
Yeah.
started, but like I don't have my neck or my head tattooed, and I might get my neck tattooed at some point because I just like the way it completes the look. But I might not. But and there are different reasons why I'm considering doing so or not. But like right now, we talked about my last couple of tattoo appointments. Like those are on the horizon. The next couple of weeks, I will be done getting tattooed, and it's not like I'm sitting here going, "Oh my God, what am I going to do? I need to keep going." I can stop. I'm honestly, I'm looking forward to taking some time away and not being in pain and not having to heal stuff. But I think that is one of the criteria that is a component of an addiction. And speaking for myself, I've never felt out of control, and nor can I, with all of my heavily tattooed friends, I don't think any of them has ever felt like they couldn't stop or out of control. It's
Mm.
We have a vision for what we want. And for me, it was having full body coverage. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into it, but wanting my full body covered doesn't mean I'm not in control.
I think that's a very good point as well, because I think a lot of people misunderstand a certain thing that happens to some people when you start getting tattooed and might conflate that with addiction. And it also happened to me. When I started at 18, I thought I wanted 3 tattoos and that was it. But the thing is, conflating suddenly wanting more with addiction might be a bit of a misunderstanding here. Because what actually happens, I would say as a sociologist, is that I had to challenge my own internalized norms from society as well when I started getting tattooed. And then when you get used to that and you find out, wow, I like being tattooed, these boundaries you've set for yourself will change and they gradually change. I've also changed some opinions. I used to not want my neck done at all, and now I've started like warming up to that idea as well. Uh, but there's still certain areas I don't want done. Like I don't want my stomach done. I want everywhere else done on my body, basically. But my point here is a lot of these personal boundaries you set when you first start out your tattoo journey, and for some they're not there. For some they from day one want to cover the whole body, and kudos to you, all power to you. But for a lot of people, I think they fall into this almost trap they set for themselves where they sort of justify it with addiction because it can also feel like you're disappointing other people that might have a more normative viewpoint of this. It could be family members, it could be colleagues, it could be whatever, friends even, by going further than you might have promised them or said you originally would. So you seek out this, like we talked about, justification for why you're doing this. Why is it suddenly, oh, you don't just want half an arm and a bit of your chest done anymore? Why do you suddenly want the full torso? Like, there's this justification both to yourself and other people because you're moving this goalpost.
Really excellent point. Right. And I'm somebody who started off, 10 or so years ago. I never would have guessed I would have had a bodysuit. Um, my original, like, good, I mean, I had a couple of crappy tattoos from the time I was a teenager, but my actual, like, really getting tattooed with high quality work was about 10 years ago. And I started with basically a half sleeve to commemorate my family. And, from there, it kind of evolved into a full sleeve and then to my back. But after that, I took a break for a long time. And at no point did I ever feel like out of control. It's just, I think it's like with any hobby or something that you become passionate about, you start to learn more about it. You start to geek out on it. And you start to
Yeah.
invest more and more of your time. So like running is a great, I mentioned that a few minutes ago. It's a great comparison. I hated running growing up. I played sports growing up. I played football, and football was my big one, I guess. But yeah, whenever we had to do training for football, I hated running with a passion. And then as I get older, I started doing it like once I was in college and graduated college because I was like, this is what I need to do to stay in shape. But I still absolutely hated it. And then over time, my viewpoint kind of shifted, and then I kind of was like, all right, this is okay. I can tolerate it. And then I started doing some like 3 mile runs and 4 mile runs. Like, this is fine. But it's very similar to what you're describing with the tattoo. Like, if you had asked me my running boundaries 20 years ago, I would have said 5 miles is the most I'm ever going to run. Like, there's no reason to ever run beyond 5 miles.
Yeah.
And now I run, 15 miles regularly, or occasionally I've run 18, 20 miles. So is that because I've lost control, or is it just because it's something that's become a really important part of my life that gives me pleasure, that gives me happiness, that um, I've learned a lot about, invested a lot of
Mm.
myself in? I think all of us at the end of the day want to have meaning in our lives, and it can be anything. I mean, there are people that study insects that I've never heard of, right? But that is their life. They care
Mm.
so much, and God bless those people,
Yeah.
because we wouldn't have the understanding of the natural world we do if people weren't passionate about that.
I fully agree. And to give it another example, because this has been very up and in the media in recent years, uh, gaming addiction. That's another thing I hate because I'm a gamer myself, and there's no loss of control there either. It is just another thing where you get more and more passionate, and as you get older, you get your own money. The goalpost again changes. You might want a different setup. You might want a new console. You might get more into certain video game genres since you learn more about them, and all this stuff is the exact same thing. But that doesn't mean you're necessarily addicted to gaming just because you sometimes feel like, you know what, instead of spending 2 hours today, I want to just geek out and have like an 8 hour gaming session or whatever. That doesn't. I think sometimes with tattooing, I think it comes more internally from people than externally, but it also happens externally that normative society wants to say, you guys must be addicted to want to keep doing this. Because also hear that one, we can discuss that a bit. With gaming addiction, though, it's mainly external, I would say. A lot of people from rest of society want to say you're addicted because you want to sit there and do that. That's a whole other stigma thing. But they are connected. And it sort of brings me to the other point with tattooing. That's also who used to like say, oh, you guys must be addicts to keep wanting to get this pain and get tattooed. Because they don't understand it and they stigmatize us for wanting to do this.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that it's still something that is looked at as being somehow deviant or strange or whatever, and it's also so visible too, right? I mean, that's kind of the, not ironic isn't the right word, but it's something that differentiates it from even substance addictions, because people even with serious substance use disorders can, out of sort of necessity or survival instinct, do a really good job of concealing their behaviors. They
Mm.
can hide their use, and they can, especially if they develop a tolerance to substance, they can even conceal being intoxicated because their brains have become so habituated they don't necessarily act overtly, intoxicated or whatever. But whereas with tattoos, uh, there's it's much harder to conceal them, I think. Um, and so that I think is a major differentiating point, and that's, and also it's also just, I think, like, what we grew up with. Like, I mean,
Mm.
there's an element of, like, drinking, and I mean, just thinking of alcohol. It was probably smoking in the generations before, but like, it's the cool thing to do. It's
Mm.
advertised on TV, and it's a lot of, at least American culture is built around drinking. You go to college, and like, what's the cool thing you're supposed to do in college? It's like drinking, and how much can you drink, and how often are you getting
Oh,
drunk?
let me just say, as a Danish man who's also studied in the UK, that's not just the US.
I kind of had a feeling, yeah. But it's almost like romanticized and glorified,
Aye.
and even though it causes a certain percentage of the public legitimate, as I was saying early on, like, it's a disease for people who have substance use disorders. But whereas tattooing is not part of, or getting tattooed is not part of the culture in the same way. It's not a rite of passage, or um, you know, it's not built around, it's not glorified in the same way. It's not advertised on TV in the same way. So I think that's another factor.
At least not in contemporary, especially Western cultures. It's not at all. There are some indigenous populations where it is very much rite of passage, like certain peoples in Polynesia and stuff like that. But I'm digressing here. But to jump a bit on the this is going to be a weird term, but it sort of popped into my head. The clinical bandwagon here with Matt, with Matt for a second. The whole thing is also for me, and I'm aware that certain people are more susceptible to addictive behavior than others. I'm aware. But I still think that would be way more also in the older generation of heavily tattooed guys that would have claimed addiction than or been diagnosed with it if it was a thing. Because you see, especially with the older generations, that a lot of them never got their hands tattooed till the fucking 2010s, even though their whole body's been covered in the 60s and 70s and the 80s. And
Mm-hmm.
that's just because that was the culture of the time that you didn't go below the wrist most of the time. And that level of control also speaks against the whole addictive idea. Because if you are, Matt, you might back me up here. If you are really addicted to something in that way, especially in a destructive way, you sort of very quickly start pushing societal boundaries and norms about what you're addicted to.
Exactly, and it's that loss of control, and that's so well said. And when people have substance addictions, they can't
Mm.
keep themselves contained within those societal norms because their brains have changed such that they've lost control, right? So they might be drinking and driving, and nobody, not nobody, but very few people would ever, at certain points in their life ever go, oh yeah, I'm going to be arrested for a DUI or multiple DUIs, which is sometimes what you see. That's something that most people would be horrified to think of, but it's heartbreaking, truly. I mean, when you see these people who get multiple run-ins with the law, or they're showing up to work intoxicated, or they're um, they've lost custody of their children because they can't stay sober when if like during visitation hours, or when they have the child over for an overnight or whatever, they just can't control it. And that, you're right, is a huge difference. I don't, I mean, there, it wouldn't shock me if somebody responds to our discussion and says, well, I know of such and such who literally did lose control and they get this tattooed, and they lost their job or whatever. I mean, there's always going to be one-offs, but we're
Yeah.
talking about like defining an actual subset, a cohort
Mm.
of the population where this would apply to.
Yeah.
And maybe there's one, here or there, 0.0001% of the population. But, when we talk about substance use disorders, you're talking about sizable proportions of the population. Um, not just like I can point to this one random guy that I've heard of, or it's probably going to be anecdotal even at best anyway.
There's also a different point, and that is it's often some sort of really obscene face tattoo and people lose their job. But in many of these cases, it always comes up later that they also had quite a bit of mental distress or unaddressed mental health issues that then
Mm-hmm.
coupled with a liking of tattoos can result in some really fucked up shit sometimes. But that again
I
does
put
not mean they got addicted to tattoos. That means that, for example, if you have some sort of a really disruptive disorder that doesn't make you very keyed into societal norms and values and how and where the boundaries are drawn. If you then also like tattoos, then you very quickly might go too far, especially if you have a very downward spiraling period in your life. And I've seen that, and that you've seen on many places. And you also, if you are in the tattoo community, me and Matt do, you also sometimes meet people that have gotten tattoos in depressive periods or other periods of their life like that. Not always in a really visible area, but where they later regret them and then they get them covered up and it helps them with the healing process if they're in a better place and all that stuff. So we can recognize it from that too. But that again doesn't mean they're addictive. It means that sadly the mind plays a bit of trick on us, to put it in a weird way, and you end up doing something you may not have done in a better place in your life.
you're almost to the DSM describing what it's like for somebody in the midst of a manic episode of bipolar disorder. That loss of control and that loss of judgment. I remember it was probably, I don't know, 15-ish years ago when Britney Spears shaved her head. And, she was having a quote unquote mental breakdown or whatever it was the media labeled
Yeah.
this as. But I think what came out, if I'm recalling correctly, after the fact was that she has bipolar disorder and she was in the midst of a manic episode. If I'm getting those facts wrong, I apologize, but that seems to be what I recall. But the point being that when people are manic, they often will lose control and they will make all sorts of decisions that they later wind up regretting when their mood has stabilized. And absolutely, that might be doing something as crazy, quote unquote, as going out and getting their face tattooed or getting extensive tattoos, because when people are manic too, they're going to be more likely to spend lots of money. And uh, so I think you're right. I think in those instances, a lot it's not the tattoo itself that they're addicted to. It's some other process that they're going through that's then manifesting. The phenotype of it is manifesting as a visible tattoo or extensive tattoo work, but it's not because of an addiction.
Yeah, because often, and I might get this wrong. I'm not like Matt, a clinical psychiatrist. That I do have some grasp of some psychology, being a sociologist myself, but it is a bit looser than some people might guess. But the thing is, often with when manic episodes, you often also end up challenging stuff you might normally be scared of or reluctant to do. So they might have exactly been thinking, "Oh no, I would never dare get that done, or get like that, or that's fucking dumb." They might have talked about how, "Oh, that's dumb how Post Malone has a." This is not a knock at Post Malone. It's just I couldn't think of a good face tattoo example, so he came up to my mind there. Like, yeah, that saw blade down his cheek, and then you have a manic episode, and you go out and get that saw blade done. Because suddenly you're pushing your own boundaries as well, and all that. And of course, we're talking a lot about manic episodes here. There's a multitude of different disorders that could result in similar mood swings and episodes. And I've also known people that are very well aware and self-introspective about these things and often have a good rapport with a trusted tattoo artist that knows when they come in a certain mood to turn them away. To be like, we're not tattooing you today. You're in a manic episode. Let's call somebody. And that sort of also harkens to good advice both me and Matt have given on several occasions online, and I would imagine in person too, in both our cases, to always figure out, especially if you're in a risky position or know yourself might have stuff like this to deal with, find somebody you trust.
That's an
Really an
excellent point.
artist you trust.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that nowadays, artists are really good at, I mean, they're certainly good at, making sure that people are not intoxicated. I mean, almost every shop I've ever been to, one of the parts of the consent process that paperwork we have to sign is, you're attesting to the fact that you're not intoxicated with any drugs or alcohol. But I also think that artists are good at picking that up anyway, and for a
Yeah.
whole host of reasons they would want to tattoo somebody that's intoxicated. But I think there's one of the great things about tattoos becoming more mainstream, even if they're not actually mainstream per se, is that there's a lot more, I think, professionalism that goes along
Mm.
with the industry now, and with that ethics, not
Yeah.
taking advantage of somebody. I mean, I've the number of instances I've heard of artists telling me, like, I've turned this person away because I didn't what they were asking me for was not something I felt comfortable doing, either on a part of their body or the particular subject matter. Like that, I think really speaks to the fact that it isn't, by and large, an ethical professional industry.
I fully agree, but this weirdly made me think of another thing that, and I love picking out these examples of why I don't think we can talk about tattoo addiction. Another thing is, and again, like Matt said with the other example we agreed on, you might know somebody, the odd person that goes against this example. Nothing we will talk about, especially when it's social scientific, would ever be all encompassing or 100%. We're talking generalized and majorities here. But if you were truly addicted to it, my interpretation would be you would be like, oh fuck, I couldn't book in with the professional artist. Wait, this guy just put on Craigslist that he's doing tattoos in his kitchen for $20, and I just need the fix. I just need to feel the needle. then you would go do that. But you're not going to do that. Most people, at least, that collect good tattoos, no matter how, even if they argue they're addicted, they're not going to suddenly go out just because they need a tattoo and then go to somebody's fucking kitchen and get a shitty tattoo that's going to get infected.
Yeah, right. That, or again, making the comparison to substance use disorders, right? Right. One of the major concerns for people who have like an opiate use disorder, like with heroin or fentanyl, is that they can get transmitted diseases like hepatitis because they share needles. The comparison with tattooing is that you would be so out of control with your desire to get tattooed that you would put yourself in a situation where you would knowingly be tattooed by somebody with a dirty needle.
Yeah.
Not that like I mean, not that you necessarily you could still go and say, well, I want the cheap tattoo because it's what I can afford, or my friend's learning how to tattoo and he's going to tattoo me in his
Mm.
basement. And unfortunately, at the end of the day, they use contaminated things and you get sick. That's not even what I'm talking about. I'm saying like somebody knowingly saying, oh, this person is using a needle that's contaminated. I'm still going to use it. That's what you
Yeah.
see with people with substance
I mean,
addictions. And
that's
I
where
can't,
that's where normal substance addiction brings you at the end, where it gets so out of control that you don't care how you get the fix or how dangerous it might be. You just need the fix.
right, exactly. Exactly. And again, so if we're saying that, if we're using the term tattoo addiction, it's people who have substance addictions, like it's just, I think, insulting, honestly, to their
I
lived
mean,
experience.
I agree to a large extent. It sort of diminishes stuff, and it sort of becomes piggybacking on something that's a real horrible situation for a lot of people to justify breaking norms,
Mm-hmm.
justify behavior you may not have yet um, come to terms with, in a way, with yourself. Because that's also the same reason both me and Matt would argue, at least when you're younger, patience is a good way to go about tattoos. Matt's a bad example because he waited very long and then he went absolutely crazy with it. with it. But again, when you're older, like Matt was when he really started getting into tattoos, you also know yourself a lot more. So Matt was way more aware of, okay, how far does he want to take this? And how does he want to go about it? And it's the same thing here. Like, patience is really important with this sort of thing. And knowing
Agreed.
your own limits and recognizing them. And then you also don't run into either with yourself or with people around you. It's also a bit less of the whole having to justify it in the same way. If you really know with yourself, at least, you love this, you at least have a way better foundation within yourself to stand on and say, hey, I don't care if you don't like it, I like it.
It's for me. Exactly.
Because
Yep.
I've never needed to claim tattoo addiction to excuse this, whether people love them or hate them, because they just love tattoos. I don't care if they're popular. I don't care if they're disgusting to most people. I don't care about any of that. I just love tattoos. So I've never
So,
needed to pull out that. No, but you have to understand. I'm addicted to them, and I know people don't do it in an apologetic way like that. I'm just sort of exaggerating to prove a point here. but I've never needed to be like, no, I'm addicted to it, so I can't help it. No, I can't. I can help it, and I want more.
yeah, exactly. Well, and we were talking about this a little while ago, but in terms of like how it becomes a passion, like for me, it's also about like a particular aesthetic, right? Like you get to a point where your body just starts to, I think, look strange. I don't want to, speaking for myself, I feel like I start to look strange having these blank patches of skin. And the whole reason I want to get tattooed is to appear in a certain way. And so um, was it that I couldn't control myself? No, I could have stopped. It's just I didn't like the way that things looked. Having been tattooed a fair amount, but not nearly as covered as I am now. And I found that too as I've gotten more into it. Like when I look at other people's tattoos, I tend now very much to prefer somebody having a full sleeve. Just the aesthetic of it. Not they don't have to be as covered as I am, but if I look at somebody's arm, aesthetically, I would prefer that they have their whole arm is covered as opposed to either having one tattoo or a couple of tattoos that are disconnected.
Yeah.
Um, but then the other part too is learning more about what's possible. Like it's so hard to know all of the possibilities with tattoos, you know,
Mm.
the different style. It's taken me literally years as a client, not an artist, to really get what different tattoo styles are and what's possible. And as I've learned more about it, there have been more things that I've enjoyed and I've wanted for myself. And again, that's not a lack of control. It's more just an awareness of what's possible or not.
It sort of harkens back to the point I made before as well with your moving the goalpost for yourself. Like
Mm.
the thing is, this happened for me, and I've known many people where this happened to them as well. And I think Matt, it also happened for you. You sort of start looking at yourself differently and get a better idea of how do I want to look. When you start liking yourself tattooed, then you start thinking about, okay, what parts of me do I want to be tattooed on? Like how do I want this to look? How might the end of this project, so to speak, look? Like I've gotten there, Matt's gotten there, many other people I know have gotten there, where it's like you sort of pick out, okay, so where might I not want to get one? Okay, but these areas are what covered and this, like, and you can't, it's really difficult to do that before you actually try being tattooed. So that's why you experience this whole thing of changing your opinion on how many tattoos you want as you go down this journey. And if you're unlucky like me and don't have too much money for a lot of your adult life, and instead start planning them, I think that's why I might have noticed this whole idea better than some people, because I've had time to really stop and look at and reflect on how much do I now want to cover my body without keeping up with new tattoos the whole time. And it's not changed for years now, but that's also I've also matured. I'm in my mid 30s a bit. I pretty much know how much of my body I want to cover, quite a bit of it, most of it to be honest. But when I was younger, I didn't, and I don't think I noticed as much the changing when I got a tattoo like at least once a year. But later on, I really noticed, well, I want more and more tattoos, but I've also just realized how much I love them, even though I haven't gotten one in a while. I just realized how much I love tattoos and want to be more tattooed. And that's a good thing to reflect on.
It is, but what you're describing actually is sort of the opposite. This theme that we keep coming back to is this loss of control. You're very deliberate. What you're describing is you have a plan, you have a vision, um, and you're sticking to that. And that speaks to control and discipline and all of the things that you wouldn't expect to see if you had a tattoo addiction. You would
Yeah.
just be doing willy-nilly, getting tattooed all the time, as soon as you got any money, or even resorting to, something else that we haven't talked about. People with substance addictions often resort to doing things they never would have envisioned doing to be able
Mm.
to fund their addiction, stealing or, trading, sex for drugs.
Mm.
And
Selling organs or whatever.
yeah, right. All the, or just selling all of their possessions, getting rid of it, leading to homelessness. I mean, it's tragic, what these
Mm.
people endure. And, you're not describing, I'm not describing that. And one other point I think I really wanted to emphasize too is with addictions, there's an element of what the DSM calls, I think, pharmacologic criteria, which is in my mind a little bit of a strange way of labeling it. But what it gets to is tolerance and withdrawal. So
Mm.
when you talk about substances, there's a concept called tolerance, which is that you need to have more and more of the substance to get the same effect that you once got. So if somebody with an alcohol use disorder, maybe it was one drink, at the outset and you could get buzzed, but if you keep drinking and it escalates over time, maybe it's now 10 drinks that you need to get that same effect. So that's tolerance. And then withdrawal is your body actually has physiological changes. In some cases, that can be life threatening, like with alcohol,
Mm.
or exceedingly uncomfortable, not life
Oh
threatening,
yes.
like with
I remember my
opioids.
dad quit smoking the first time. Ooh.
Yeah, it's miserable, right? I mean, it's not going to kill him physiologically, but it feels horrible.
Mm.
Um, so that's tolerance and withdrawal, and that's something else that you don't see with with a tattoo addiction.
I mean, imagine a world where if you haven't been tattooed for a while, you got the shakes or migraines or
Right,
nausea and all that. Whew, that would be
right. That'd be that would be miserable.
absolutely. I mean, it's a good point to point out. I mean, of course, I would argue as a sociologist, there are some form of not necessarily clinical addictions, but things you can get sort of addicted to where you don't necessarily have these symptoms. As Matt said as well, it's a weird one, but it is still with certain when you introduce foreign elements into the body. That's often how addiction shows. I've never heard of any addiction where you add something externally into the body where there's not going to be withdrawal symptoms. Because it
Hmm.
has to do with, and now I'm gonna be very horrible at the whole biological thing, but essentially what it boils down to is you introduce some new substance into the body's sort of biome that it then becomes used to and wants more and more of. So when you then remove that, it fucks up. It does everything it can to get you to get it again. And I've
I
yet to
definitely
see any
remember in high
evidence to
school.
suggest tattoo ink does that.
Exactly, exactly. It doesn't. And we talked earlier about behavioral addictions in general. Food addiction, eating, sex addiction, exercise, work, and there are on the surface things about those that look like like an actual bona fide physiological addiction, and we may better understand them in time where we say this is some type of problematic um, situation for the person or
Mm.
behavior for the person. Uh, but is it more in line with the neurobiological changes with an addiction? Is it more what we would call an impulse control disorder? Or is it its own separate thing that we just don't fully understand now?
But I think you made a good point earlier about the whole thing with how you treat it as well. Because I think there's a
Mhm,
reason why sex addiction, for example, is treated often with psychologists. Because it's
mhm,
often tied to something else that's going on in your life. It's not
mhm.
because you just got sex and you have addictive personality and now you're fucking hooked.
Yep,
Sex is great, but it doesn't do that.
right, right.
But that's really why you go to psychologists, not, for example, a psychiatrist like Matt in some cases, because what you're treating there is the symptom. You're trying to figure out why did this become something you do to cope with something else. And tattooing, I would argue, we don't know yet. And there may be some cases out there that could argue for this. There may be somebody if you're watching or listening to this, that could be a good case for this. But it is, again, something you're doing as a coping mechanism.
Mhm.
And it could be in a positive or negative way. We don't know your life sitting here over Zoom talking about this. But that's, again, the closest we get to addiction. Because we've also both, I would imagine, at least I have heard stories of people that as soon as they get into something horrible happens, they go down and get a new tattoo to sort of cope with it or something like that. And sure, but that's again not a tattoo addiction as such. It sort of masks in a way that very much looks like that, but it's more that it becomes a certain coping mechanism for some other stuff that's going on in your life.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's not really the tattoo itself or the sex itself. It's or whatever, the food or exercise, whatever. It's that's just sort of how it's manifesting. But there is the underlying issue. So you're not actually addicted to getting tattooed or having a tattooed body. Yes, I agree with that.
And also a good point here, probably to point out, me and Matt are not all diminishing the seriousness of these issues, or if you're using stuff to cope in such a way or anything. We're just talking about how it's not exactly an addiction.
Right, right, exactly. I mean that's not to say that these cannot be seriously impairing issues or whatever. I mean, as somebody, myself, who used to be morbidly obese, I mean, I had a really hard time with my relationship with food, and it caused me all sorts of issues, medical issues and emotional issues and so on and so forth. So, I mean, I can speak from lived experience. I mean, um, it was very problematic. It's still just not quite what would be considered an addiction, at least as we currently understand it.
Yeah, exactly. But that's exactly it. You probably also had something more psychologically to deal with to overcome that problematic relationship to food. Not to
Yeah,
dig into that now, but it speaks to the point I was trying to make. That of course, I think that is what a lot of us as well, other than what we talked about earlier, with some people sort of using it to justify. I mean, the closest we get to legitimate, some people having addictive behavioral patterns around tattoos is often when it becomes a coping mechanism for something else.
Exactly. Yeah. Um, Hopefully my audio is okay. My headphones
Oh,
just
I mean,
died.
it's been good, but it got even louder now. But it's good.
All right, good. I'm just gonna pop those off.
We get Matt's ears now as well for the rest of the interview.
Yes, the untattooed ears. Yep.
I mean, as we said, everything above the neck, not yet.
Not yet. No,
But again,
maybe
that's what we
never.
talked about. Me and Matt, we both were guys for a long time. Not that we've known each other that long yet, sadly, but that didn't want our necks tattooed. And I sort of tried it out with one tattoo down at the bottom, and now I'm sort of, even after that, didn't really want the rest of my throat and that done. Nowadays, I'm warming up to it, but it's not because of, oh, I just need more space. I'm not even lacking space. I'm far from near Matt's level of being tattooed. It's just I kept imagining, okay, what could look good in this area? Could there be something? Could there be a design that would just be fucking cool? Because I've always wanted the sides of my head done and the back of my neck and stuff like that. And that's what I'm thinking, but wouldn't it be weird having the back of my neck done, but not anything on the sides or anything? Like, that's the thing. You reflect on these things, so you figure out new ideas. And as Matt pointed out very poignantly, you also figure out what's possible. Because I've seen some designs in the last years that's like, whoa, you could incorporate these different things to make it something really cool and fit it into the Polynesian stuff I have there. And yeah, it could absolutely work out, you know. And then you change your idea.
Well, yeah, and one other. I'm glad you said Polynesian. Made me think to something we talked about a little while ago about the idea that in certain cultures and societies that it's a rite of passage, right? So I mean, there are some. I mean, it's not an area I'm an expert on whatsoever, but I know that there are certain indigenous populations that are completely covered. And from what my little understanding is that it's very significant. I think spiritually.
Mm,
And as a rite of passage, and these are individuals who have even more tattooing than I do.
mm.
And again, I think it would be frankly disrespectful to look at them and say, well,
Oh yeah,
that's a
if you
society
came
of
from outside, like externally, and said, "Oh no, they must be addicted to it. They're masking," because then it almost sounds like, and I almost said it already. It almost sounds like you're accusing them of just masquerading it as spiritual, then,
right,
which
right,
removes the purpose of why they're doing it.
right. And it'd be fascinating to hear. That's actually just kind of thinking out loud. Hearing what people from those cultures think about people from our culture, both people from our culture who are not tattooed and people like me and you from our culture who are heavily tattooed
Mm,
but are not doing it for the same reasons that they're doing it
mm.
for. It'd be really interesting to kind of to get that take on it.
I mean, I think a good start, and I know some anthropologists are doing this. They used to have a podcast, for example, called Inking of Immunity, um, which I used to be a big fan of, but it's been on a long, long, long hiatus. But they often do research work in Polynesia, especially on Hawaii. And I think American tattoo lovers and anybody interested in researching it, especially, have a unique opportunity there because Hawaiians have an indigenous tattoo culture and tradition that they also mix in with more modern tattoo traditions and ideas. So they're sort of in a really cool,
Hmm.
unique place where they can sort of speak on both topics, and listening up more when they talk about that might be very worthwhile, and you could learn a lot from it, you know.
Be fascinating.
Absolutely. I mean, I always argue, and I'm trying to decolonize myself, as Maya, who was on the podcast not long ago, also talked about, where I'm trying to not just be another white man just thinking, no, no, that's just how we do things. That's just, but trying to be more critical, of, well, how are people that are not white, westernized, pseudo Europeans in the US and Canada and Europeans like myself doing things. It's fascinating stuff.
It is. It is.
Because, I mean, I'm not a spiritual guy at all, but it's still worthwhile listening to, for example, when Maya talks about Inuit faith and how it ties deeply into tattoo traditions. You know?
Yeah, it is. I think it just speaks to the deeper level that tattoo, or the deeper meaning that tattoos have for so many of us, because I'm not a particular religious or spiritual person either. But they are very significant to me, that beyond just the outward appearance of them. And I think they are for most of us.
Yeah, it's far more than just decorations, I would say. I think that's what we have in common all over the world, a lot of tattoo lovers. But indigenous cultures or anything like that, that it is not just ink under the skin for most of us. And even if we ignore the unique designs a lot of us get in that there's something more to it. I spoke with Michael Reese a bit about that in his episode. That is, it's the whole thing that when, especially when you go over the threshold in a way of being heavily tattooed, like I would at least firmly say Matt is there undisputedly. Depending what convention I attend, I may not be categorized that way, but to most normies, I think I hit the mark all right. But do you sort of start loving being tattooed in and of itself?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's the whole act of being that. This whole I like to think of it as this whole bet on yourself, this whole staking the claim of who you are in a way that we sort of fall in love with. Michael talked about this quest for authenticity that tattoos hold within them, especially for people that get really into it, like me and Matt. Where even if it's not a deep meaning behind a tattoo or some good story tied into it or anything like that, the whole act of being tattooed is still us being more ourselves.
Well, agreed. And you mentioned video games a while ago, and this is an area you know much more about than me. But I dabble in video games nowadays. But like in playing Call of Duty, I noticed like one of the big, and again, if I'm butchering these terms, I apologize. But like one of the big things that it seems like you could earn, doing the online multiplayer stuff is like different appear, like you could change how you appeared with all these different modifications. And I think that just speaks to, this fundamental desire that so many of us have, that we want to look a little bit different. Our appearance is so important, and and not just for the physical change of the appearance, but for how we view ourselves and how society views us and how we sort of define who we are. But I was just thinking when I was playing these games, I mean, I never modified how my little guy looked on there, but I noticed that, most people did. When we would start a match or whatever, like almost everybody on my team would have all these different appearances. And so just speaks to like, it's such a reward and incentive, just even in the online world, where your avatar is virtual. And so it stands to reason that in the real world, it would be even more important.
Yeah, I mean, we sort of, at least from sociological perspective, yearn for this control over our appearance and for it to represent who we are. But I think that's sadly why a lot of people have sort of a dysphoric self-image in a way nowadays. Because, and I'm sorry to be very critical to anybody that sees themselves as more mainstream or normal here. I know that's a bit more rare in the communities me and Matt are in, but it sort of gets beaten out of you by society, especially in very hustle culture minded societies like the US sometimes. It's a bit less about the appearance though in the US than the UK, depending on where you live. I noticed that. But in Denmark, for example, my experience at least of living in Denmark all my life, if you look different, that's your fault that it needs to be fixed, So a lot of people seek, as Jean-Paul Sartre would say, he was way more harsh about this, so I'll be less harsh in how I word it now. But as he said, as a French philosopher, existential philosopher, most people are not brave enough to utilize their free will. As he saw it, we all have free will and we can all express ourselves. We can all choose how we want to look and all that stuff. Most people wouldn't dare do it because they can also weigh the consequences. And for a lot of people, it is too high a consequence what stigma you might face from being different. And in reality being more yourself. Which is personally my favorite thing about tattoos. And that's why I resonate so much with Michael Reese. I know I keep talking about him often in this podcast because I see this quest for authenticity. And I feel in a way that's also diminished when people talk about tattoo addiction. Because I'm like, so you're not really doing this for you. So these tattoos don't mean shit to you, your
Mm,
tattoos.
mhm,
Because drugs to a drug addict don't mean shit to them. They just need them.
mhm,
It's not who they are when you talk
mhm.
to somebody who's clinically addicted to a substance. I think, am I incorrect there, Matt?
Yeah, I think uh, I, I certainly don't think it's what anybody sets out for, and I think probably, I mean, there's a big, we try not to use the term addict anymore because the person is far more than their addiction. They're
Mm.
somebody, it's this person with a substance use disorder or this person with an addiction, right? Because yeah, they aren't their addiction. They're not defined by that.
Exactly.
One point I wanted to sort of build off of from what you were saying about the authenticity and the free will is by doing so, you're making yourself extremely vulnerable to the
Mm.
world. It's almost like you're a dog laying on the ground showing your belly to the world.
Yep.
But once you take that step, I think why so many of us really fall in love with tattoos is because once you've put yourself out there in that vulnerable way, it's also empowering.
Oh, yes.
Like, so you realize that you can survive, and that I think gives you a certain strength.
But there's a reason people have been talking about for decades now, at least my entire life. I've seen people talk about this from as soon as I could read tattoo magazines myself. So let's be fair. At least the last 18 years of my life, I spent reading tattoo magazines, even before I could get tattoos. I've seen people talk about the confidence they get from a new tattoo they love. And as I started researching tattoos within sociology throughout my undergraduate and my postgraduate degree, I realized that confidence is probably way more to do with how they feel more like themselves, how they are sort of claiming their right to be themselves.
Mhm.
That's at least how I see it. That's my theory there. And it might be where my bug. I think I might have gotten to the root here with Dr. Davis here about why I hate this idea of the tattoo addiction so much. That it sort of diminishes that. I don't get why people want to take that away from themselves. There's like, no, I just need tattoos. Fuck anything. Because I've even met people when you get into the nitty gritty of it, even people with covered in, to use the horrible term, shitty tattoos or prison tattoos or anything like that. Tattoos they might just want to look badass with, but don't really care about how good they look. When you still get into it, the fact of being tattooed still means a great deal to them.
Mhm.
And it's still this authenticity thing. It's still this being themselves thing. Even if
Mhm.
they have a completely different way from me and Matt of how they go about getting a tattoo, or how they plan it, or how much meaning or not meaning it needs, and all that stuff, they still have this same shared, this is me thing. This is who I am thing. But that's erased by this addiction idea, I think.
Well, and I think, to a certain extent, it's because from about anywhere beyond 5 or maybe 10 feet away, a tattooed person looks like a tattooed person to the outside world. So whether you have, tattoos from a world-class artist, or whether you have,
Mm.
tattoos that, maybe wouldn't, at least for their artistic quality, be considered all that good. Once you get to a certain level of coverage, it really is being, like you're saying, about being a tattooed person and not the
Mm.
tattoos so much in and of themselves.
Yeah, I mean that's also what I love. There's not a whole lot of social scientists that recognize this fact yet, but Beverly Ewan Thompson has started for quite a while. She's actually from New York. For any Americans listening in, she one of your own there. Very much. She's been talking about that, especially from a female perspective, about this whole idea of that we need to recognize that there are some people out there that are tattooed people, and some people out there that are just people with tattoos.
Mm-hmm.
That's the other thing I've seen. This goes back to the pet peeve of mine that made Matt laugh earlier quite a bit. I see way more people that are just people with tattoos that complain and want there to be a tattoo addiction than tattooed people doing it. like us people who are seriously marred in the community and the culture of tattoos, I rarely see any of us be like, no, I'm addicted to it. Oh no, she's addicted to it. Oh no, he's addicted to it. No, rarely do I ever see that. But I've seen plenty of people that might just only have a sleeve or a few tattoos here and there, don't consider themselves a tattooed person, don't really go to conventions or read magazines or anything like that. Yet they are quick to draw out it like a fucking pistol. They're like, I'm addicted to it. When
Mhm.
people ask them, so why do you get them? Oh, I'm addicted. Or another one that, oh, this might make Matt laugh again, but the classic California white girl that after her second tattoo posts on Instagram, hashtag addicted.
Well, and I think it's because they don't have the same, certainly the same meaning to
Yeah.
people that you're describing than to people like us, right?
Yeah.
And right, because they're not people that are going to be following other artists on Instagram or having, tattoo collector friends or going to conventions or whatever. It's not really a passion. And
Uh,
that's why I think that we're loath to call it an addiction because it really does cheapen our own experience too.
Yeah, I mean, if we're gonna be honest here, and I think that's important to do, as we both admitted now, that is also a part of it. Like, it does sort of cheapen what we see as something, to put it in a very up there way, kind of glorious. Like, to us, tattoos are in a way glorious. They're magnificent. Like, they're something to be sought after and cherished.
They are. Yep.
And we're not diminishing that. Even for people that don't get many tattoos, it can still be profoundly meaningful for them. That's not all what we're talking about, even though we may put it in some funny ways. Especially, I'm very guilty with my kind of language of doing that. But that's not what we're saying here. We're not trying to cheapen that. If you ever only want one tattoo, cool, that's good for you. We're just again being critical of this idea of the tattoo addiction. We're not,
Yep.
as some kids might say today, we're not trying to yuck anybody's yum here. Like,
Yeah, that's a good one. That's one my daughter uses.
I'm just trying to be with the kids.
You'd fit in great with the elementary school crowd.
Oh
You-
man, that actually took the fun right out of that one. Oh, and I've never been more happy I didn't wear snapback for this interview.
yeah, right, right.
At the moment. No, but I think it's a good point we've made here that we're not all trying to cheapen other people's experience here either. I think we agree we want to put some attention into why it shouldn't be so almost a fad or like a cool thing to say you're tattoo addicted sometimes.
Yeah, it shouldn't. And when people use the term, most of the time I'm not gonna, I don't like to be pedantic or get on
No,
a soapbox. So I usually just kind of ignore it. But yeah, I think it kind of speaks to you got to look at the messenger, right? Like who, which is really a point that you've been making. Like who's saying this and what is their agenda in saying it? But um, amongst the people, the tattooed people that I tend to associate with, I like you're saying too. I can't imagine ever hearing anybody utter anything like that.
at least I don't hear it. Like, uh, I see it so often said online in comments and stuff like that. But whenever I'm in conversation with other tattoo lovers, whether they're highly educated like me and Matt, or they're working class background like myself, or anything like that, or just people that you get to know at a convention, I rarely ever have heard it mentioned. We're just basically talking about how much we love tattoos, like that, or nerding out about some other shit. Because we're all deep down nerds when you get this many tattoos. I think that's a whole other thing I have. Like, I think a lot of people are very nerdy when they get a lot of tattoos. They just might not be nerdy about classically geeky things.
Oh, I consider myself a tattoo nerd, 100%.
Oh, also that. A lot of us are also just deeply tattoo nerds. Like, I think me and Matt are probably at the point, both of us, where we can recognize certain tattoos just by seeing them. We can be like, oh, that's a Matt Curson, or oh shit, that's done by Becky Rose. Like, fuck, man. Like, it's like our rock bands in a way.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yes. I think the term tattoo nerd is a far more appropriate description than tattoo addiction.
That'll just admit you really fucking love tattoos to yourself
Yep.
and other people. Because
Yep.
that's the whole crux of the matter. That
Yep.
it's actually more sad for you if you feel you need to justify it. Or if you are really in a dire position, I highly recommend seeking some sort of help, counseling in a way. If you're coping with it in a way, if you really need to justify this to yourself, you might be going through some trouble. Let me just say this for a serious moment right now. Do seek help then,
Hmm.
because you might want to get some better tattoos when you're through it, then instead of rather going out and getting something you might regret right now.
Yeah. Well, and also just making sure that you're getting your mental health, taken care of
Absolutely.
in
Always
general.
make
Yeah.
sure you're keeping yourself healthy when it comes to the mind. That is the most important part of us, I would say.
Absolutely.
Well, to try and lighten the mood now, before we end it, Matt, I always like your advice you give. So I want to ask you again, what advice will you give to people out there wanting to get into tattoos? But let's rather than how we did it last time, let's go with people that want to be heavily tattooed like you. What's a thing you should consider?
I think a few things. Number one is budgeting,
Mm.
making sure you have a plan for how you're going to pay for them because they're not cheap. Even tattoos that are, not necessarily done by super well-known people or,
I mean, especially in the
just
US, the prices are quite high.
yeah, yeah, they are. It seems like we're way higher than most other people. Um, but yeah, so I'd say like having a plan for how you're going to budget, and having I think a plan for like what it is that you want, meaning
Mm.
is it particular subject matter or artistry or theme, or is it more of a style? And also thinking like, do you want like a big cohesive piece? Like, do you want to go more like a traditional Japanese bodysuit where it's, by one artist and
Mm.
it's going to be, the typical themes that you'd see in a Japanese bodysuit, koi fish and samurais and dragons and that type of thing. Um, or do you want something more like what I've done, which is getting lots of different pieces and lots of different styles from different artists? um, there's no right or wrong way, which is one of the great things
No, no.
about
I mean, good
getting back.
tattoos go with good tattoos, as I heard some. I don't know who it was. I wish I could reference them right now because it's a brilliant thing to say, and I really agree with it. Good tattoos go with good tattoos. So
Yep.
don't be worried about that either. It's just I think the point Matt's making here is just it's good to be sure with yourself what you're going for, so you don't regret it later.
Yes, exactly. I think having a plan for, getting like awkward spaces filled in is helpful too, especially if you're doing it like me, like more like piecemeal.
That's
Like if
definitely more your expertise, the awkward spaces thing. Because I I remember when you were posting the what was it, the back of the fire, right where the ass meets the fire. That bit you were getting done. That is,
Mhm.
if anything, an awkward spot.
It's an awkward spot. Yeah. So like, like what you're gonna do to fill it in there and like finding an artist who is amenable to doing it and making sure that it flows well with the other work that you have. Um, yeah, those are some of the things that I would recommend. And probably pacing yourself. I mean, I know I say that as
Mm.
somebody who's done a lot of work in a short period of time, but there's still been some degree of like,
Mm.
you know, kind of
Plus, again, you
mapping.
waited quite late in life before you went this hardcore into it, which is also a way of pacing yourself, weirdly enough. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
if you'd done this, if we were, you were 20 years younger than you are now, and you'd done it this quickly, I would probably have been less like cheering you on and more like, "Are you okay?"
yeah,
Because
yeah.
it's
No,
it's too fast if you're in your late teens or early 20s and you go that fast, even if it's
yeah,
world class work like Matt's, you might still not know exactly how you want to look when you're
yeah.
way older. So good, good to pace yourself.
It is, yeah, and really, one thing I tell everybody, regardless of what degree of coverage you think you're ultimately going to wind up with. Well, one point that you made is always expect that you may wind up with getting more than you thought. But if it's your first tattoo, I definitely recommend whatever idea you have that you wait some time. I would
Mm,
say like 6 months if you're like really young, like if you're
mm.
18 or your early 20s, really wait 6 months. And if 6 months from now you still want that same thing, then go for it. Maybe it doesn't have to be 6 months. I mean, that's an eternity to an 18-year-old. I remember how long that would have felt to me at that age, but at least some time. I mean, a day or a week or even a couple of weeks, I don't think is long enough.
I mean, I'll add on this following cheat then to that, because, and call me a nerd if you want any young people watching this, if there are any. But a good way to cheat this system is do like I do. I wanted to choose at 14, waited till I was 18. That means I fought the tattoo through for 4 years. Bam. 9 days after I turned 18, in the chair. Never regretted the tattoo ever. It's not even one of the best done ones I have. By far. Never regretted it because I fought it through for such a long time.
Yeah.
Lots of
Yeah.
my tattoos actually, because of course I didn't just think one tattoo through in 4 years' time. I planned others as well while waiting. But it's the best decision I ever made, even though 18 is still quite young, I would argue. There's no shame in waiting further than that. Some of the people I know that are the happiest about the tattoos uh, waited till they were in the at least early to mid 20s before getting started at all. There's no shame in that. It's not a race. I
No,
would have
no.
lost, and many of us would have to Matt already if this was a race.
Yeah, no, but it's not. You don't want, it's not something you want to rush through by any means.
But I think that's also what people like you and me mean are talking about more when we say think before you ink. It's not necessarily the whole, hey, have a deep backstory to your tattoo. Of course, that helps too. It's fine if you want to have that. I have for a lot of the many of my first ones, I had deep backstories they had to symbolize in that. It's not necessary, but what is necessary, especially with young, is thinking it through. The whole thing of being tattooed.
Yes. Yeah.
And as
Agreed.
always, I would add on, don't start on the face, hands, and neck. Because
Oh,
even if it's a brilliant tattoo and it's gonna look good, you are not yet used to how people react to you being tattooed. And even the positive attention can be really annoying
hmm.
at
Yeah, it can
times.
be overwhelming. Yeah, I
It
mean,
can,
now I
it
just
can.
ignore it, but it definitely does take time. I'm glad that I had the progression go in the way that it did for me, with
Oh yeah.
doing sleeve and then getting more body covered and then eventually get my hands and then my palms done. But that would have been a lot, I think, just
Hmm.
to, it's easy enough to just tune it out and ignore it
Yeah,
when
yeah.
I want to.
But that's
But
also because you're used to it. You're used to how people
right.
react when they see your tattoos. Like me, I started out in the chest, and the cool thing about that was I just had to wear a t-shirt. You couldn't see them.
Hmm.
So I had a lot of control for the first long time. I was tattooed because I started with my chest and my ribs of who saw them. So I sort of got used to how people react to them. And then, I got more visible tattoos. But it didn't bother me much how people react because I was already used to it.
Yep. Yep. That's an excellent point.
I mean, I really wish more people would listen to that because as you can clearly tell by Matt, especially, and you'll have to take my word for it as I don't have my hands or my sides of my head done yet. We don't mind visible tattoos at all. This is personal choice, especially from Matt's side, that he doesn't have any face tattoos and that. I think both of us have plenty of people we know nowadays that have the full face done as well.
Oh
Nothing
yeah.
against that. It can even look
No.
really cool on some people.
Yep.
It can look awesome. Just personal preference. And you got to figure out your own as well. So don't ever, I think that's another piece of advice I wanted to give for a while. And I will make one of my advice videos on this as well, that I'm started on Instagram. Don't get them to be cool. Don't think that, oh, I need to have a face tattoo and that's gonna make me cool. Get a face tattoo later on in life if you really want a fucking face tattoo.
Hmm. Well, there's always going to be fads and trends within
Oh,
tattooing.
absolutely, absolutely.
Right.
Also
So
with
like
positions and both and imagery and everything. Like,
Right, right. It's like nowadays, like it seems like it's kind of the cool thing for people to get face tattoos or whatever. And I think that we're going, of course, to where tattoos are more accepting or being more
Mm.
accepted. Society is more accepting of people tattoos, but um, that doesn't necessarily mean like face tattoos in particular are always going to be or the coolest thing or like whatever the subject matter or style.
Mm.
So like that is a reason. It's not just your own personal preference, like what you may want or like now at this age may change in time, and you really want to be sure about that for yourself. But also, like if you're getting tattooed because you think it's cool, I mean, I do think there's an element that for our lifetimes it will always kind of be cool, but this particular
Yeah.
subject may not be, or the particular
Yeah.
style, may come and go.
I would always say tattoos are not cool in and of itself. People with tattoos are cool. But
Yeah.
that's because you think it through. Like a tattoo on its own is not necessarily cool. It can look cool, it can be all that stuff, but it's not cool. Getting tattooed, this is gonna be rude, but I hope people will enjoy it. Getting tattooed to be cool is like eating cake to be skinny. It doesn't work for most people. But getting tattoos and then you love them and they really suit you and you really enjoy them, that's when they become cool. That's when because I think we might have both experienced this at conventions. You can meet somebody and you're like, oh, what's with that tattoo? And it can look shit, it can be really brilliant. But what makes it cool is the story behind it. Not the story tied into the tattoo, but the story the person might tell you about why did they do that or how did they, because it just suits them. They fucking love that tattoo, and they're willing to be like, no, no. The reason I have a tequila bottle on my ass cheek is because, and then they tell you that whole story. That's what makes them cool. Just getting some face tattoo just because a celebrity you admire has it, or you think it's cool because your friends are like, yeah, fucking just do it. It'll be sick, bro. That's where it sort of is a fleeting attraction, and it'll go away.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You don't want to get yourself stuck in that situation by any means, because
No,
undoing a tattoo is not pleasant.
no, it's yet to ever go under it. I don't hope never will. I don't think I ever will. But what I see here and can tell, laser is horrible. Way
Yeah.
worse than tattoos. You do it for way longer, way more sessions, and it's way more expensive. It is in all aspects not something you want to
Mm-mm.
do.
If you can at all avoid it,
If you have
absolutely.
anything you regret, you absolutely want to do it. Let me just be clear. Absolutely. And it's great that they offer it out there, but you shouldn't aim for that.
No, no. Yeah, if you can avoid it, it's way better.
Right. Uh, I think we'll have to cut it off here because I can always, with Matt, the danger is always that it's just going to be a 3 hour episode because I love talking to Matt. But I think we'll tie off the episode here. I think to round off the point real quick, we just want to clarify a little critique of tattoo addiction. Of course, how you feel about this, whether you agree or disagree, that's up to you. Just take it in, mull it over, maybe add it to how you think about it, and hopefully it'll help you reflect a bit on this. But in no means are we trying to force you or to diminish your experience, whether it's good or bad with tattoos. Right? I don't. Do you have anything new we need to plug, Matt?
I don't think so. No, no. I was just thinking while we were talking, maybe I should make some like tattoo nerd t-shirts or something. That could be kind of
Oh,
cool.
that would be good. I would buy one immediately. You know what? You should do that. Then you should fly. Then you and John should fly me and Dunk over, and we can all four model them.
Yeah, there you go. I like that. I like that. But no, nothing else. Just my socials, the inked shrink, the underscore inked underscore shrink on Insta and TikTok.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as always, Matt, love talking to you. And for anybody who's enjoyed this episode, whether you like listening to it or watching it on YouTube, thank you very much. And thank you for all the support you guys give. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Hello everybody, I hope you enjoyed that reunion with Dr. Matt Davis, tattoo lover, heavily tattooed indeed, more than most of us, and a trained psychiatrist who works professionally with people, also with people with addiction. And I hope you keep in mind that just like me and Matt have argued in the episode, there could be more evidence that will prove us wrong later on, but as things stands right now, neither me and Matt would argue that anybody really is addicted to tattoos. This is our argument as academics, and especially him as a professional psychiatrist. But that doesn't mean you can't have these feelings, or can't feel this sense of loss of control in some rare cases and that. But just keep that in mind and take it as food for thought. Take it as something educational you can bring with you further on, and something you can always reflect on if you should ever get into an argument with others that may think you're addicted, or have that sense of feeling self, because you might just be that you don't know how else to defend your love of tattoos, which might be greater than other people can make sense of. Because that's how we can all experience that other people still buy into the socially constructed stigma that often comes with normative society, and thus they may find we're addicted if we dare go beyond what they think is reasonable. But I'm not going to start over a whole new episode like that. A bit of housekeeping before I tell you about the next episode. Because of personal stuff in my own life, I'm moving very soon. So from now on, not in the episodes, but in the outros at least for a little bit, and in episodes I'm recording from now on, starting in August 2024, there will be a new locale to where I'm recording. Just so you are not going to be too shocked to see me in a new room when I record. Hopefully it'll still be great quality. I will do everything I can to ensure that. And next time we're starting off with a bit of a selfish episode, 2 of them in a row actually, because in the next 2 episodes, starting with Dustin Kiskaden, I'm going to be talking to tattooed sociologists. But Dustin is a bit special, as he would classify himself more as a writer and former tattoo artist himself, and he wrote an amazing book we're going to be talking about called Blood and Lightning that you may or may not have read yourself, but I highly recommend it. And we're going to be diving into how he did the research for the book, what the significance of the book is, and what he hopes people take away from it. So stay tuned for that in a couple of weeks, and I'll see you around.